Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here, site super moderator for Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com and also the main host of the Avatar Online podcast. I'm here today with my non-spoiler review for Smoke and Shadow Part 3. I'll just start by saying major thanks to Dark Horse Comics for supplying me with the review copy for this book. And just again to confirm, this is going to be a non-spoiler review, so I'm going to touch on aspects of the book, but I'm going to, for the most part, not really go in depth into the major what happens, the details of what happens and stuff like that. And more for the people who haven't got the book yet, with the whole release date confusion, give you an idea about what to expect and stuff like that. So yeah, this is part 3, the conclusion to the Smoke and Shadow trilogy of series. We have already had Smoke and Shadow Part 1, followed by Smoke and Shadow Part 2. Now we have Smoke and Shadow Part 3. Don't have the physical copy yet, but here's the cover for anyone wondering what it looks like. Just in case you go out to your local comic book store looking for it, that's what the cover looks like. So, cool. Let's get into actually talking a bit about this book. This has been the most hyped Avatar comic so far. I think this has very much eclipsed The Search. Now, The Search obviously was hyped just by default, because it was about Ursa, Zuko's mom, and what happened. Everyone was interested and invested, even people who weren't necessarily into the comics from The Promise. People got invested in The Search because it was a really important subject matter. That book also reintroduced Azula back into things, and the whole setup primarily for Smoke and Shadow was that at some point Azula is going to come back into the series, and that had people excited for it. That plus the potential for this book addressing the Mei-Zuko relationship and them getting back together. People are invested in that relationship, people are invested in the character of Azula, and you have a book that people were very excited for. Two parts went by and we didn't really see Azula apart from the very end of part 2. Though technically that reveal meant she was actually in the previous parts, but we didn't really get to know her and really get an idea of what she was like. And the speculation for part 3 has been pretty crazy, people thinking this is happening, that's happening, and now having read the book, it's one of those things where I feel both I really like what it did in some ways, but I'm also very disappointed in what it did in other ways. And I think it comes down to the fact that this series, this format that the book seemed to be in at this stage, which is one series with a name, and there are 3 parts to it. Each part has to be 72 pages long. That format didn't seem to work for this series, because the way part 3 ends, yes, it resolves some of the things set up in Smoke and Shadow, but for the most part, the big things that people were excited for are still left open going into whatever's next. Now, we know what's coming up next is North and South, which is a comic series that's going to be set in the Southern Water Tribe. Basically, Team Avatar's return for the first time since the start of ATLA. That's a big thing. But none of that's about Azula, none of that's about Zuko or Ki, Ursa, Mei, stuff like that. I think that's so important it has to focus on Team Avatar. Which means the stuff that Smoke and Shadow didn't resolve is going to have to be left until whatever the next comic book series is, which we don't know about just yet. And that's the problem here. We've grown used to these comic series being fairly contained, that going into The Promise, whatever it sets up, I'm going to get a resolution to. The Search, I'm going to end the search knowing what happened to Zuko's mother. With the Rift, I'm going to end this Rift with some sort of a conclusion as to what Toph's relationship with her parents is like. With Smoke and Shadow, I don't really know what way to classify this book as. Ultimately, reflecting on what was it about. Ultimately, I think the main plot, now reflecting on it now, is this Kimura Kage kidnapping the kids plot. That is resolved. But the important character stuff is left pretty much wide open going in. There's development, absolutely, but it really feels like Smoke and Shadow, they kind of came to a conclusion that there's no way to fit this story into 3 parts. The 216 pages, all 3 parts together. there's no way to do that, so we'll just roll that over into whatever the following series is after North and South. Because I very much ended part 3 thinking, okay, so is that it? I mean, was I not sent some of the pages? Is there a Smoke and Shadow part 4 I'm unaware of? That's the way I ended this book for the first time feeling. Because I'm so used to, for the most part, these series not really ending with like unresolved plot points. This one leaves a lot open. But on the positive side of things, that marks a kind of shift in the comics that we haven't really seen just yet. The idea that these comics are going to be telling larger stories than just 3 parts. That's actually really interesting, and that really reflecting on it now, there was no way they were going to completely resolve Azula's arc in just one book. There was just not enough page count to resolve the plot of Smoke and Shadow, reintroduce Azula, and have some sort of a redemption arc for her all in one book. Part 3 is basically it's the reintroduction of Azula back into the series and establishing a little bit about what she's up to and where she's going next. And that's about it. I think I was quite happy with what they presented to me about Azula, but it didn't really feel, I suppose, all that solid. That like really I waited for this. Like why wasn't that? There was like potentially like a way to write this series where like Azula was introduced earlier on, and we got more time with her. And Smoke and Shadow is a much more kind of valuable series, I suppose, because we got a lot more of Azula. Now, I think a lot of Azula fans will be very happy with the way she's written and presented here, in that she is markedly different than she was at the end of The Search. She was in a very interesting mental situation at the end of The Search, very conflicted, having all these visions of her mother, conflicted about what to do. Like, does she go through with Ozai's plan or not? And she ended up leaving the evidence, the letter, behind and just kind of fled into the woods. And obviously, like, it was then established that they searched for her for a while but couldn't find her. When she's reintroduced, she talks a lot. She actually does talk a lot in this book. And she is much more composed and calculating, similar to how she was, I suppose, more towards the book 2 Azula, but you can still get the hint that there's still a little bit there, that she's still a little bit unbalanced and not thinking 100% clearly about things, but she is the mastermind of this thing, as the kind of back cover for the book reveals. She is the leader of the Kimura Kage at this point. It's Ukano sort of is kind of working with that as well, but Azula is the one pulling the strings fundamentally. So I think people will be very happy with the return to Azula being a villain, and that basically returning to the way people fell in love with the character as this just super controlling character who just dominates all the people in every scene that she's in. So there's that, but they've added this kind of scary edge to her, that she has always been like somewhat threatening, like in ATLA and stuff like that. But the fact that she is slightly unstable adds something a whole lot more to the character that makes her very unpredictable, which is the kind of key difference from her before. Again, I don't want to go into a whole lot about like what exactly she's up to. She has a lot of interactions with Zuko, and ultimately it does reference the stuff from The Search that they were talking about, the whole idea of what is Azula's destiny, and you basically have her come to a conclusion about what she considers her destiny to be. And it's quite interesting, but again, it's one of those situations where they reveal it, and then the book comes to an end, and you're just kind of left like, okay, I'm going to have to wait through like 3 or 4 books to get Azula back into things, to explain to me more about what's happening next. So I like what they did with Azula in terms of presenting this long story, in that she is going to be this character who I assume returns at certain points. So yeah, she's definitely presented as like she will return at a certain point, and potentially, I suppose, be this recurring antagonist throughout the the comics as long as they go on, until I suppose they potentially have some longer plot written for some sort of redemption, because some of the expected scenes you would think that they would have with like Azula don't happen. Like there's really not a whole lot of hints at any redemption just yet for her. So it's pretty interesting that like there's no real obvious step towards kind of turning her character around. She is very much still presented as a somewhat villainous character. So very interesting what they're doing with Azula. Um, let's switch things over to talk about the romance, the other thing that people really care about now. We're sort of in a love triangle here with May currently dating Kalo, and then Zuko and May both still having feelings for each other. And what they do with it here is interesting in that, like, again, like the previous two books, there are little moments between May and Zuko that clearly show that they still care for each other and the potential for them to get back together. But this is the first book where they, in any way, start to create an issue between Zuko and Kalo. In the grand scheme of love triangle things, the little argument Kalo and Zuko have here is fairly tame, so it's not like really annoying to watch. Like it's kind of Korra happening again with the love triangle, and that's not the case here. It's just a quick little thing that quickly calms down. But again, the resolution on where the romance leaves off is a little bit confusing. It's just like, really? You just, I can tell you don't have enough page count to go further into depth into this, and that where Kalo leaves off in the book is just weird. Like he just has a couple of lines, he's here and there throughout the book, and just ends in this really odd spot where he's doing something, but we don't have any clue as to really what it is. And May and Zuko, there's some progress, but like they're not really back together or anything like that. It's weird. Like I'm going to be really interested to see once people, a lot of people in the fandom start to get a hold of this book, how they feel about the way all of these different things were done. I think people were very happy, as I said, about Azula. The romance stuff, maybe not so much. And then, obviously, some of the other plots are that Key, for example, obviously at the end of the last book, was captured by the Khmer Kage. She's brought to the same place where the other kids are. And there's some pretty nice interaction between like the three main kids, which is obviously Tom Tom, May's brother, Guri, who is the constable's son, I think it is, his son, and Key. They're the kind of three key kids, and they have a little bit of interaction. You know, they're fairly young characters, so it's pretty interesting. And there's a really big reveal that happens about Key. Won't go into it at all, but it's kind of surprising and interesting to see where they go with it. In that, like, Key was always interesting to me with terms of her really close relationship to Zuko and calling him Zuzu and stuff like that. But now she seems incredibly important going forward, and it makes me even more interested in seeing like her interact with Azula, because that doesn't really happen here. So Key has become a lot more interesting, I think. With regards to the Key Ursa stuff, there is a resolution to that. Again, I don't want to go into how exactly that happens, but it's again kind of quick. Not a whole lot of time given to it, but it's nice, and you kind of understand like that. It just required a little bit of time to get back going. Ursa, after I think being a little bit forgotten in part 2, she wasn't really in it all that much, and they didn't really address a lot of the stuff from part 1. Comes back here and has some really great scenes. In particular, a couple of pages of her and Iroh are really strong. We obviously got established to us before that he was one of the few people she really could confide in during her time in the palace. And it comes back here, and there's some really nice emotional moments between those two that kind of help Ursa kind of come to a conclusion. And as I said, the Ursa Key thing gets a conclusion, and it's nice. And a kind of surprising scene towards the end that, like, I think some people expected, some didn't. And again, I think that was quite well done, much needed for the character. And for the most part, I think, like, they've dealt with most of the stuff with Ursa. There's still obviously Azula out there, and I'm sure Ursa, now that she's dealt with a lot of problems with her other daughter and stuff like that, will focus her attention on, like, potentially trying to fix things with Azula, which is, I think, absolutely going to be the focus of things going forward now that the political situation has calmed down. All of these kind of character issues seem to be, for the most part, gone. I think everything can focus now on dealing with Azula. So when we do return to the Fire Nation plot, I think that's what it's absolutely going to be about. And other than that, there's some nice little reference moments, like May and Ty Lee referencing their past as being really close friends with Azula, playing as kids, and that plays a pretty interesting role in terms of the plot, in terms of, like, understanding, like, how the Kamurakage get around and stuff like that. But other than that, I'm kind of thinking about what else there is. Ukano, actually, I want to really briefly comment on Ukano. I was actually really impressed with how they brought his little plot to an end, in that he did some pretty awful stuff, basically faking the kidnapping of his own son, blaming May for it, like back in part 2, like really kind of bad stuff. And I like the way they treat this, in that characters find out what he was up to. There's progress made with him, in that it's clear that Azula's the main one behind it, but he was invested in this plot, and he kind of realizes that he has to somewhat, make amends and stuff like that. And just how they do it is quite well done. They don't focus on it too heavily, but it is a pretty well done plot. But yeah, I don't want to go on too long in this video, but coming back to the point I was making at the start, it absolutely is one of those things where if you go into this book expecting everything to be answered, us to know tons of information about Azula, May and Zuko, and all of this, you're probably going to be disappointed. If you just treat this as the next Avatar comic, the 12th volume of these Avatar graphic novels, I think you'll be a little bit happier with this, knowing that, okay, this is going to sort of wrap up the Smoke and Shadow plot with regards to the kidnapped kids, but the character stuff is going to continue, and there's going to be, I assume, there's no way they're just going to leave it like this. There is going to be a follow-up at some point to Smoke and Shadow that directly links off this. So I think that has to happen. And that, as I said at the start, that's both interesting and frustrating, in that the previous series has led us to believe that each series will get a really solid conclusion. This is the first series that doesn't really have the most solid conclusion, but it's also the first series that sets up something bigger with Azula, with the relationships and stuff like that. So I'm just going to end it there. It's probably the most negative I suppose I've been on one of these comics, but as you go through the book yourself, I think you'll see that that's very much the case. I think there were limitations with regards to the page count on this book, and you can sort of tell it's really straining to just deal with everything that it's set up, and absolutely there's a much larger story here than just that is just dealt with in these 3 books. And so, we're going to have to wait a long time to get a follow-up to this, but when it does happen, I think there's the potential for it to be very good. And as I said, there are some really nice moments otherwise throughout Ursa and Iroh's conversations. Ki has some really nice stuff. The way they resolve some of the plots, like Ukano, is well done, and even Aang gets some nice kind of funny moments, even though I think overall he really didn't need to be involved in this series really at all. But so yeah, I'm going to end it there. Link in the description to my kind of written review for this book on the site, and then also be aware that potentially this Sunday we will be doing a podcast review of the book, which will include spoilers. We'll be basically going through it page by page, analysing it and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that will be the podcast this weekend. I'm just trying to, obviously, like we planned one subject matter, but then we have to switch it to that. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. But yeah, that's been a review. Thanks for watching, and bye.